The wind moved slowly over the broken fields of Elleris. The land was dry, filled with stone and dust, and the once green hills were now gray and quiet. Long ago, people had worked in these fields, planting wheat and singing songs about growing seasons and hope. Now, the songs were gone. The war had taken them, just as it had taken many other things. In the highest tower of the royal city, Queen Marina stood by her window. She was young, but her eyes looked old. Every day felt longer than the last, and every sunrise came with new news of loss. Yet, she refused to give up. Her people said she was the queen who challenged death, and she carried that name like a heavy crown. She did not rest, and she did not cry where others could see. She always stood tall, even when her heart wanted to fall apart. Marina had seen her kingdom fade year after year. The great walls of the city were cracked, and the bright banners that once decorated the towers were now torn and colorless. Farms had burned in the first wave of attacks, and the rivers had turned dark from the ashes of ships. Still, the people followed her. They trusted in her calm voice and in the strange, stubborn light that never left her eyes. Each morning she walked through the market square, speaking to whoever remained. The traders who sold scraps of metal, the children who helped carry buckets of clean water, the few soldiers who still stood guard. They would stop what they were doing and bow as she passed. She always told them the same words. "We are still here, so we still fight." The words had become a kind of promise, one that held the cracked city together. Her closest advisor, Captain Lewis, often asked her to rest. "Your Majesty," he would say gently, "you cannot carry the whole world on your shoulders." She always gave him the same small smile and said, "If I fall, who will stand?" It was not pride that guided her, but duty. She believed that as long as she kept walking, others would not forget how to walk behind her. At night, she would return to her chambers and stare at the map of her world spread across her desk. So many red marks showed the towns that had fallen, so many borders erased. But she kept the map clean where the capital still stood. A single candle flickered near it, the only light in a dark room. Sometimes she spoke to that candle as if it were a person. "You will not go out," she whispered. "Not yet." News came that the last enemy army was gathering again, far beyond the western ridge. This army was larger than any before. It had burned hundreds of settlements. The queen knew they would come for the capital next. She could almost feel their approach when she stepped outside at dawn. The air was still colder than before, and the birds had stopped singing. The city felt like a living heart waiting for one final beat. One morning, the first refugees arrived. Families, tired and dirty, stumbled through the gates. Marina walked down among them herself. She helped lift a child from a cart, soothed a crying mother, and ordered the kitchens to feed everyone. "No one is turned away," she said firmly. Some of her guards protested, worried about supplies. But she reminded them, a kingdom that refuses mercy has already lost. That night, she stood alone in the grand hall, where the sunlight used to dance across the glass windows. Dust floated in the empty space, catching the light from a small lamp. She touched the throne but did not sit down. It felt wrong, almost empty, to act like a ruler on a throne when her people slept in ruins. Instead, she walked to the balcony that overlooked the city. The rooftops shimmered faintly under the faint, distant fires of war. The stars above seemed smaller now. As she watched, a strange calm came over her. She knew she could not stop what was coming, but she also knew something else: she would face it. The world could shatter around her, but she would not break. If her people saw her unafraid, maybe they would remain unafraid too. "Let death come," she said softly into the wind. "Let it look into my eyes and remember me." Her voice was not loud, but it carried across the silent streets. Somewhere far below, a soldier standing guard lifted his head. Maybe he did not understand her words, but he could feel the power of them. And so, the Queen of Elleris stood alone at the edge of a dying world, the last flame in a sea of shadows. She did not know that somewhere beyond those burned hills, a man named Ethan Brooks was still alive, a man who, before long, would stand beside her and change everything. The day began with smoke over the western ridge. The people of Elleris watched from the towers, whispering that the enemy was coming at last. There was a strange silence before the sound of battle. The air smelled like metal and dust. Soldiers prepared their weapons. Horses stamped nervously on the cobblestones. It felt as if the world was holding its breath. Far beyond the ridge, where the earth was dry and covered in ash, a man lay beneath broken metal. His name was Ethan Brooks. He was a soldier, though he had never wanted to be one. Before the war, he had fixed machines in a small workshop near the river. He liked simple things, like working with his hands, watching the sunset, and hearing people laugh. But when the fighting spread across the land, he joined the army to protect the town he loved. Now that town was gone, burned to the ground. He had stayed behind to cover the retreat of his unit and had been caught in the last explosion. He woke slowly. His body hurt everywhere. His uniform was torn and blood covered his arm. The sky above him was gray. He could not hear much, only the faint echo of wind. For a moment, he thought he was dead. Then a small spark of pain reminded him he was still alive. He pulled himself out from under the metal and looked around. The battlefield was empty, except for wrecked vehicles and shadows. He found a canteen half buried in dirt and took a careful sip. The water was warm, but it kept him awake. Ethan looked toward the direction of the capital. It was far, but he could see faint light beyond the smoke clouds. He did not know if anyone there was still alive. He started walking anyway. Every step hurt, yet he kept going. His boots sank into mud and sand, but he did not turn back. Each mile he told himself, "Keep moving, Brooks. Someone needs to know you are still here." He said it out loud, so that the sound of his voice would not disappear into the silence. 2 days passed like that. He ate dried rations that tasted like dust and slept sitting against cold rocks. Nice. Once he saw a burning aircraft crash in the distance, but he did not stop to watch. The 3rd day, scouts from the capital found him. They rode small vehicles and wore the crest of the Queen on their shoulders. When they saw him standing there, covered in dirt and blood but still moving, they hardly believed their eyes. "You came from the west?" one of them asked. "Yes," Ethan said. His voice was hoarse. "The lines are gone. How did you survive?" "I'm not sure," he replied. "Maybe I just forgot how to die." They lifted him onto their vehicle and brought him to the city. When the gates opened, people gathered to look at him with surprise and curiosity. It had been weeks since anyone from the outer defenses returned alive. They whispered that perhaps the Queen's prayers had been answered. That evening, Queen Marina was told that a survivor from the Western Front had arrived. She ordered that he be brought to her chamber at once. When Ethan entered the hall, he stopped, unsure if he should bow or salute. He had never been in the presence of royalty before. Marina stood near the window, light falling across her silver cloak. Her face was calm, but her eyes studied him carefully, seeing the marks of fire and struggle that covered him. "You are Ethan Brooks," she said softly. "The reports said everyone at the Western Line was lost." "I guess the reports were almost right," Ethan said with a faint, tired smile. His voice had the dry humor of a man who had seen too much but refused to fall apart. The Queen looked at him for a long time before speaking again. "Tell me what you saw." He told her about the destroyed villages, the collapsed bridges, and the endless waves of marching enemies. He spoke quietly, without anger or fear, just the steady words of truth. When he finished, the room was silent. Marina turned toward the map on her table. Almost all of the western lands were gone. When she looked back at him, there was something in her eyes that he did not expect. Not pity, not sadness, but respect. "You walked through death and came back," she said. "Why?" Ethan rubbed a hand over his face. "Because someone had to come back," he answered. "Someone had to tell you what still stands." Marina nodded slowly. "You speak like a soldier. I never wanted to be one," he said. "But someone has to fight when there's no one left." That night, Queen Marina sent for food and clean clothes for him. As he ate, she walked to the balcony and looked over her dim city. The fires in the distance glowed faintly. She could feel the weight of war pressing down harder each day. But somewhere inside, a new thought grew. Perhaps the kingdom still had a chance, not because of armies or weapons, but because of people like Ethan Brooks, who refused to stop walking. And long after Ethan went to rest, Marina stood awake by her window. She watched the horizon and whispered to herself, "Maybe we are not alone in this fight." Outside, the wind stirred gently, and for the first time in many nights, the queen felt a small piece of hope return. The next morning, the city of Elleries woke with a nervous kind of energy. The air smelled of smoke and oil. Every worker, every soldier, every child moved with quiet purpose. The queen had called a meeting of the war council. It was to be the most important one in the history of the kingdom. Word spread through the halls that the last battle was near. Outside the palace, people gathered in the streets, holding small banners, praying that their queen would save them again. Inside the great hall, all the commanders stood around a large table where a fading map lay open. The queen entered, her cloak sweeping along the stone floor. Everyone grew silent. She looked tired but strong. Ethan Brooks stood near the back of the room, still in his simple soldier's uniform. He had been invited to speak, though he did not understand why. He was not a leader, yet when the queen asked for presence, no one said no. Marina looked at her people, then at the map. Her voice was calm. "The enemy is advancing from the west," she said. "Their strength is greater than ours, but we have something they do not. We have will, we have heart, will not surrender." The hall filled with low murmurs. Captain Lewis spoke, his hand resting on the map.
"Your Majesty,"
he said carefully, "we are running out of weapons. We cannot match their fire. If their army reaches the gates, we will fall." The queen listened, silent for a moment. Then she turned to Ethan. "You have seen what their machines can do," she said. "Tell us, is there a way to stop them?" Ethan looked at the map. The ink lines blurred in his tired eyes. He remembered the fire, the broken cities, and the people he could not save. He thought for a long time before answering. "We cannot fight them the same way. We will never win a battle of numbers. They have to strike where they do not expect." "How?" Captain Lewis asked quickly. "There is a weapon the engineers were building," Ethan said quietly. "I saw part of it before the front fell. It was called the solar lance. They said it could burn an entire fleet if someone could get close enough to the heart of their command ship." The room fell into stillness. Everyone had heard of the solar lance, but no one had believed it was real. It was said to be too dangerous, too powerful for anyone to control. The queen looked at Ethan with sharp interest. "Does it still exist?" "The base where it was built was destroyed," Ethan said, "but the engineers escaped. Some might still be in the city. If the weapon is finished, it could end this war." Captain Lewis frowned. "At the cost of a life? The pilot must stay inside to guide the core. It has no way to come back." Ethan nodded. "Yes, it needs a human hand to complete the process." The queen's eyes drifted to the high windows where sunlight streamed in thin lines across the stone floor. The air was heavy, filled with fear and hope mixed together. "If that is our only chance," she said finally, "then we will finish it." The council broke into activity. Messengers ran through the halls, engineers were summoned, and guards prepared the lower chambers. The old labs beneath the citadel came alive with the clang of tools and the hum of machines that had slept for years. For the first time in months, people worked not in despair, but with purpose. Ethan was given a small apartment near the palace so he could rest. But he could not sleep. He kept thinking about the weapon, about what it meant if it truly worked. He knew what it would require. Every line of its design, every warning from the engineers, had made that clear. Whoever went into the solar lance would never come out. It was a death sentence, dressed as salvation. Later that night, the queen came to see him. She found him sitting by the window, looking at the dark horizon. He stood as soon as she entered. She motioned for him to sit again. "You do not rest," she said gently. He gave a small smile. "Hard to rest when you know the sky might fall at any moment." She looked at him closely. "You are different from the others." "You do not seem afraid." "I am," he said. "But I've learned that fear is lighter when you carry it for someone else." They sat in silence for a while. Outside, the first stars appeared through thin clouds. The city was quiet except for the distant sound of hammers from the underground labs. Then, softly, Marina spoke. "If the solar lance is real, I will fly it myself." Ethan turned sharply. "No, that is madness. I am the queen," she said calmly. "It is my duty." He shook his head. "Your people need a leader to live for, not a martyr to mourn." Her eyes narrowed. "You think I would send someone else to die for my crown?" "I think," Ethan said slowly, that the crown means nothing if no one survives to see it shine. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Behind the calm words lay the same unspoken truth. One of them would have to die for Alaris to live. Neither said it, but both understood. At last the queen stood. "Find the engineers," she said. "I want the solar lance ready by dawn." When she left, Ethan looked at the horizon again. The sky glowed faintly red where fires still burned. He whispered to himself, "If I have to, I'll be the one." Far above the city, thunder rolled. The next storm was coming, and with it the last chance to decide who among them would carry the fire into the dark. Morning broke with a weak sun hidden behind gray clouds. The city of Alaris looked calm, but everyone knew that the enemy fleet was drawing nearer. The people worked in quiet hurry. Children carried water to soldiers, blacksmiths hammered metal for armor, and engineers gathered with tired eyes in the lower chambers beneath the palace. The air felt heavy, like it was waiting for something to happen. Queen Marina walked through the underground tunnels where the solar lance was being built. The air smelled of hot metal and burning wires. Sparks jumped from cables as engineers tried to bring the machine back to life. It looked like nothing she had ever seen. It was shaped like a long spear made from silver light, resting inside a metal cradle that hummed softly. It was a weapon built not out of hatred but hope. An old engineer named Henry stepped forward and bowed. His hands trembled, his face marked with black soot. "Your Majesty," he said, "it will work, but it needs a pilot. And once it starts, the energy cannot be stopped." Marina nodded. "I understand." Ethan Brooks stood behind her, silent but watchful. He had spent days helping the workers repair wires, test circuits, and lift heavy panels. The engineers had noticed how patient and skilled he was with machines. Some said he understood the solar lance better than anyone else now. But he knew what that meant, and so did the queen. By noon, the enemy's shadow fell over the western hills. From the city walls, huge columns of black smoke could be seen far in the distance. The enemy's ships filled the sky, their sound like thunder rolling across the heavens. The people of Alaris gathered in the central square. Soldiers stood with their weapons ready. The queen climbed the balcony above the square and spoke to her people. "Today," she said, "the world tests our courage. The sky may burn, the streets may fall, but we will not kneel. We are Alaris, and we will live." Her words spread like fire through the crowd. Even the weakest among them stood straighter. They shouted back her name not from fear but from pride. After the speech, Marina went down to the chambers again. Ethan was there, wearing a plain flight suit. Engineers were checking the last control panels. When Marina saw him, she stopped. "You are not preparing what I think you are," she said firmly. Ethan looked up. "Someone must fly it." "I already told you," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I will go." He shook his head. "No. You must stay here. If you die, the city will lose its heart. They believe in you. Without you, everything ends." She walked closer, her hands tightening at her sides. "And what about you, Ethan? You think I can watch another person die for me?" "This isn't for you," he said softly. "This is for them. It's for everyone who is still alive." For a moment, neither spoke. The sounds of machines filled the space. Marina looked into his eyes and saw no fear there, only calm acceptance. The same unbreakable will that had kept him walking through the ashes of the war still burned inside him. She wanted to order him to stand down, but she knew it would not change his mind. Command meant nothing to a man who had already accepted his fate. Finally, she said, "You will at least take a chance to return." He smiled faintly. "If there's a way, I'll find it." Outside, the first blasts of distant fire shook the ground. Dust fell from the ceiling. One of the engineers shouted that the enemy fleet had begun their attack. The queen stepped aside as Ethan climbed into the narrow cockpit. The metal doors hissed shut around him. The lights across the room turned bright white. Henry looked at the queen, his voice quiet. "When he reaches the altitude, he will release the core. It will free all its energy at once." Marina could not answer. Her throat felt tight. She reached out and placed her hand on the cold glass window of the launch tube. Through it, Ethan looked at her one last time. He raised his hand slowly in a final salute. She pressed her palm against the glass as tear lines shimmered in her eyes. The countdown began. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The The solar lance roared to life, climbing upward with a sound like lightning. The force tore through the tunnels as bright light filled the chamber. In seconds, the weapon disappeared into the dark clouds above. Everyone shielded their eyes. The ground trembled as the fire streaked across the sky. On the surface, soldiers and citizens looked up. They saw the long trail of fire lifting higher and higher, slicing through the enemy's lines. The fleet turned in panic as the weapon rose toward their command ship. For a single heartbeat, the world held still. Then the sky exploded in golden light. It was brighter than day, brighter than anything anyone had ever seen. The blast painted the clouds with colors of sunrise. People screamed, cried, and fell to their knees. The enemy ships broke apart, vanishing into flame. The echo of the explosion rolled across the land for miles until everything went silent. When the light faded, the sky was empty. The enemy was gone. But so was the solar lance. Marina stood among the smoke and dared to look upward. Nothing remained but fading sparks. Her heart felt hollow, as if something inside her had been torn away. Yet at the same time, she felt peace. Ethan Brooks had done what no army could. He had given his life so others could live. That night, the city burned torches to honor him. People sang softly in the streets. The Queen stood alone on the balcony and whispered to the quiet sky. "You won." The wind carried her words away as the stars returned to their calm places in the heavens. The next morning, the city of Alaris was silent. The sky was no longer dark with smoke, and for the first time in many years, no enemy banners flew above the horizon. The people came out slowly from their shelters and broken houses. They looked around as if waking from a long, fearful dream. The streets were covered in dust, the walls of buildings cracked, but the world was still standing. Birds began to sing again in the ruins, and the sound felt strange and beautiful. Queen Marina stood on the highest terrace of the palace and looked out across her kingdom. The sunlight touched the tops of the towers, making them shine like glass. Yet in her heart there was no peace. Her eyes searched the open sky where the solar lance had vanished. But there was nothing, only the soft white of morning clouds. She whispered Ethan's name quietly, as if saying it might bring him back. By noon, reports came from the scouts who had searched the land. The enemy fleet was gone, completely destroyed. No sign of life or machine remained. The people of Alaris gathered in the main square and cried out with joy. They hugged each other and waved flags that had been hidden since the war began. Children laughed and old men wept. The Queen watched them from the balcony. They celebrated because they lived, not yet understanding what their victory had cost. As night came, torches were lit all over the city. Drums and soft songs echoed in the streets. The people wanted the Queen to appear, and when she did, the crowd grew silent to hear her speak. Her voice carried softly over the flames. "Ilaris lives because of courage," she said. "One man gave his life so that we could see another sunrise. We will honor him, not with sorrow, but with the life he saved." The crowd raised their voices, shouting Ethan's name. They did not know him before the battle, but every person there now felt as if they had lost a brother. Marina watched them and tried to hold back her tears. When she finally turned away, she went to her private chamber, where the lights were low and the world was quiet again. For many days she did not leave the palace. She read every report from the engineers and soldiers, hoping to find some clue that Ethan might have survived. But the truth was clear. There was no return from the solar lance. Everyone told her gently that he was gone. She did not answer them. She continued walking to the balcony every dawn, watching the horizon where the light first touched the sky. It became part of her life, the waiting, the silence, the remembering. Time passed. The city began to heal. Builders repaired the walls and planted gardens where craters once scarred the ground. Farmers returned to the fields, and the rivers ran clean again, new markets filled with colors and laughter. People spoke with joy about the future, not the past. They built a new monument in the center of the capital, a great pillar of white stone, shaped like a rising flame. It had no name carved on it, only a short line that said, "To the one who gave everything, every year, on the day of the final battle." The Queen would walk alone to that monument, with a single golden flower. She would place it at the base and stand in silence while the city bells rang. Sometimes she spoke softly to the wind, as if the air might still carry her words across the empty sky. "You are remembered," she would say. "You always will be." Years turned into decades. The queen grew older, though the light in her eyes never faded. Children were born into peace, and learned in school about the Great War, about the brave queen who never surrendered, and the soldier who gave his life to save them all. Their teachers would tell the story in simple words that always ended the same way. And because of one man's courage, Elaris found its morning again. One evening, as the sun was setting in gold and red, the queen sat by her window. Her hair was silver now, but her gaze still carried strength. She thought of Ethan's smile, the calm way he had faced his fate, and the last salute they had shared. She wondered what he had felt in that final moment, the light, the silence, the peace. She said quietly, "I was supposed to protect you, but you protected us all." A tear rolled down her cheek, though it was not one of sadness. It was gratitude, pure and clear. Outside, the city bells rang again, their sound carrying across the valleys. The people of Elaris gathered below, lighting candles that glowed like stars on the streets. They sang a song of the new dawn, a song of hope. Marina listened, closing her eyes. She felt peace wrap around her like a warm blanket. Somewhere deep inside, she could almost hear a distant voice, calm and familiar, saying, "You kept the promise." And as the night came, the queen smiled at the horizon where the sky met the earth. The light of the setting sun touched the windows of the palace, turning them gold. The world of Elaris stood strong, filled with life and laughter, carried by the memory of one brave man. The queen who had once defied death now watched her people live the life he had saved, and that she knew was the true victory.